Hey, gorgeous! Welcome to the Business Mindset Podcast with Holly Wharton, which combines powerful strategies on how to upgrade your business mindset, along with practical business tips to grow your business. This podcast features solo shows with Holly and also interviews with inspiring women entrepreneurs from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. And now, here's your host, Holly Wharton.
Hello and welcome to the Business Mindset Podcast with Holly Wharton. Now you may be wondering, what the heck is the Business Mindset Podcast? I was subscribed to the Ready to Bloom podcast. Yes, you were. And in the same way that about a year ago I rebranded from Socially Holistic to Ready to Bloom, I am rebranding everything again. So you may have noticed that I've completely upgraded my website, changed the domain to my name, hollywharton.com, and I have rebranded the podcast as well. So it's now being called the Business Mindset Podcast. It's the same podcast, same interviews, same solo shows, same great guests, same host, me, just a different name. So I'm going to make this short and sweet so that we can get on to the episode, but I wanted to let you know what the heck is going on here. So this is now the Business Mindset Podcast. Same thing as always, different name. So thank you very, very much for tuning in. Thank you for continuing to subscribe to this podcast. And I'm going to turn it over to today's episode, which I'm really, really excited about. So thank you very much. Hello and welcome to the Business Mindset Podcast, episode 139. This is your host, Holly Wharton. I'm here with today's special guest, Amy Scott. Amy quit her office job to travel the world in 2004 and has never looked back. She now keeps a home base in Buenos Aires while she travels the world with her Argentine husband. She's the founder of Nomadtopia, a hub of information, inspiration, and community and support for others who also want to live their ideal life anywhere in the world. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. As someone who has lived half my life in other countries.
Yes, exactly.
Very excited to talk to you. So tell us a little bit about your background and your business journey and how you got to where you are today. And particularly, how did you make that decision to quit a normal job and move to another country and live around the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had a perfectly good job. You know, it's like, why do you jump out of a perfectly good building or whatever? Yeah, I was working in book publishing in San Francisco and, enjoyed my work and enjoyed my life, really. Like, things were going quite well. And yet I had I guess it really was prompted by a conversation I had with some of my cousins who are about 10 years older than I am. And we're kind of saying like, we're so glad that we traveled and did all this stuff before we settled down. And, we know you love to travel. Like, is 2 weeks vacation really enough? And I was like, well, no, of course not. Right. Exactly. But what can you do? Right. But none of them were like, well, quit your job or, giving me any like specific things they were telling me to do. And yet it really sparked something. And that was a weekend away. And by the time I got home, I was like, all right, here's the plan. And I was living with my boyfriend at the time and told him, here's the plan. I think we should, save some money, quit our jobs, travel for at least 6 months. And then, I don't know what after that. And he was totally on board. Anyway, fast forward, to make a long story short, I spent about 2 years totally obsessed, saving as much as I could, reading everything I could get my hands on, and just like plotting this adventure, because I did not make a lot of money and San Francisco was expensive even 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, but I was so determined and ended up breaking up with my boyfriend about halfway through that, which didn't really, diminish my plans or my desire to do this at all. And so then I took the plunge. And, it's funny, I had thought about freelancing for a long time. Part of my job working in-house was hiring freelance copy editors and proofreaders, indexers, some of whom, like they lived all over the place, right? In fact, one of them was an American who lived in Costa Rica. And so I had that like in my head that I could do something like that. But the thought of quitting my job to do that seemed like terrifying and just not an option. And yet for some reason, this didn't seem the same. And I mean, I'm sure, saving money was a huge part of it. And I probably never thought like, well, if I want to quit my job to work for myself, I should save some money for that. But I just, was feeling so driven to have that experience that it was like I was like just had a one-track mind. I was so obsessed for those years. And then the nice thing was after that, I was like, well, I already don't have a job. Like, what do I have to lose? So I might as well try out this freelance thing and see what happens. So I spent about 9 months, well, altogether, actually, from the time I quit my job until I officially started working for myself was 11 months. Mm-hmm. So I was living off savings that whole time, but came back to the U.S. after about 9 months. And with the plan that, like I said, like, well, might as well just, hang up my freelance shingle and see what happens. And that was 10 and a half years ago.
Wow.
It blows my mind it's been that long. But, I started out with a lot of connections, from my years in publishing and just, milked those from the beginning to get work. And it's definitely shifted over time. My clientele and the work I do is very different now than it was 10 years ago, but I'm still doing the editing work. Mm-hmm. That's still my primary source of income. And I'll stop there so I don't get off track for the original question.
So what do you think it was that contributed to getting the courage together to leave that stable job and go off traveling?
I think one was just some kind of, I don't know, just like a gut feeling that it was something that I just had to do. Mm-hmm. And of course, I had no idea. I had a sense that it would probably change my life in some way, but at the time I had no idea what that would look like. And I think it was also just kind of a now or never. I was in my late 20s and it just seemed like, well, and like my cousin said, right? Like it's only going to get harder from here on out, presumably, however my life goes. I should do it now. And I think, just, I took so much time to prepare and to save money. For me, I'm obviously not, I am more so now, but then I wasn't, a very impulsive person. I wasn't one of those like, I've got $200, what the hell, let's just do it. I was very much like, I want to make sure I've got this covered. I don't want to get like stranded in another country because I don't have enough money, So that really created a safety net for me, and I mean, the actual job part of it, I was like, well, I can always come back. Like that didn't seem like that big a deal. And it probably helped also. I worked for a travel publisher, a guidebook publisher. So, I was not the first person to quit to travel. So it helped, that I totally had their support and they were all excited for me. So I think that helped. But I think it felt like, it's not going to be like, what's the worst that could happen really? And so it just, which is not to say that, actually the quitting was easy, but I was terrified getting on the plane. I was definitely like, what am I doing?
So
I was like crying at the airport.
You?
Yeah. I mean, after all,
reality.
All this time of the preparation and thinking about it and dreaming about it. And then, like at the airport, like, oh my God, what have I done? So I mean, it's not that it wasn't scary, but I just, something I knew I had to do anyway.
So after you got back to the US, started freelancing, how long did it take you then to get back out on the road and start taking your business all over the place?
Yeah. So that was definitely, the intention from the beginning. I figured, okay, if I set this up the right way, don't take on any local clients or anything, I can do this from anywhere. So I was kind of testing it out all along. And I moved around the US. I lived in LA for a couple months and then took a road trip across the US to move back to the East Coast. So that was definitely a test. I was working while I was driving across the country. And then, so let's see, I started freelancing in August 2005 and moved to Argentina in May 2007. So almost 2 years. And I was just wanting to build up my savings a bit again. And then wanting to get to a point where I felt confident, like, yes, I can do this from anywhere. And yes, I'm making enough money to support myself. And then, of course, the cost of living was much lower in Argentina. So that actually gave me a lot of breathing room that, in that sense, it felt like a really easy decision.
And why Argentina, may I ask?
Well, I had been there on my round the world trip and I really liked it. And it took a while to decide. I had a couple other places on my list. I had thought about Arequipa in Peru and then also Valparaiso in Chile. And so I knew I wanted to go somewhere I could work on my Spanish. That was like the one thing I knew. And then I was just kind of thinking, those were places I really liked, but like what kind of experience did I want to have? And I had always lived in big cities since I left for college. And I just thought, I think that's the kind of experience I want to have. And I thought I won't stand out as much in Argentina as I will in Peru. I'm tall and blonde, so,
You're safe in Argentina.
Exactly. So, it was kind of putting all those factors together, and I decided that seemed like a good choice. And then I ended up meeting my husband there, so even better.
Yay. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome as you were building this business location independently?
Let's see. Well, it's the nature of the work is pretty portable to begin with. Working with publishing companies, like they are used to working with people offsite. And so that part of it was pretty straightforward. All of the people I was working with were used to, not meeting people in person and doing everything over email. And I think a lot of what the adjustment was around paper. Because, I started out operating the same way I had in the office, where I had like paper tracking sheets and, like printed out style guides for my clients and all of this stuff. And over time, it took a while for me to realize, wait a minute, why am I printing all this stuff out? Why do I have all this paper? And then, of course, I had to make sure I set up a situation where I could get paid no matter where I was. Clients were usually sending me paper checks.
Oh.
Well, it's 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And, and part of the difference now, too, just because my clientele has shifted, is that a lot of my editing clients now are online entrepreneurs themselves. And so, PayPal and things like that are kind of a no-brainer for everybody. Yeah. And then the other thing that I actually did lose a small segment of my work when I moved to Argentina, because back then, proofreading work was still done on paper. Like people would FedEx me the printout of, the laid out book, and I had to do all the, markup on paper and FedEx it back. So I said, well, I'm just, I'm not available for that anymore, because this just doesn't make any sense to send it to Argentina, and hopefully it'll get there.
And plus FedEx is so expensive to and from Argentina.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was, some of those kind of just mapping out like how I do things, and maybe I need to set them up differently, or there are some things I just won't be able to do if I truly want to be anywhere. But I think, having all of that in mind from the very beginning probably helped, so I didn't get too entrenched in a certain way of doing it and then realize that I had to change everything. This was, from the beginning, it was the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah. And how location independent are you now? I mean, how much time do you spend in Buenos Aires, and how much time do you spend traveling?
Well, I like to say that you don't have to go anywhere to be location independent.
Yeah, true, true.
Like technically I'm 100% location independent in the sense that I don't have to be any one place. But over the years, we've been spending less and less time in Buenos Aires. Ooh. So we got married in 2012, and my husband quit his job shortly after that. And first we were gone for 6 months and went back for 6. Then we were gone for a year and went back for 4 months.
Wow.
And then we were gone for a year and we went back for 6 weeks.
Wow.
So it keeps just getting smaller and smaller. And so those times away, we've been all over. We've been in the US and Canada, spent about 9 months in Southeast Asia and India. And then the last year-ish has been between Mexico, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and then back and forth to the US and Argentina. Wow. So, it's still kind of a base in the sense that Roberto's family is there and we have an apartment there, but we've been spending less time there. And we just kind of go with the flow and see what we feel like doing and where we feel like going. So,
and as you said, you can be location independent and still have a base. So what would you say are some of your top tips on how entrepreneurs can add more freedom to their business so that they could possibly pick up and go, or not, but just have more of a sense of freedom by freeing up their systems or whatever it is that you recommend?
Yeah, I think systems are a big part of it for sure. Like I mentioned, the paper trail, if you're used to having lots of files around you and things like that, kind of look at how much you really need that stuff. Or if you need it on paper, you could have a digital version instead. The payments are definitely a consideration if you want to be gone for a while. How are you going to receive payments if you're not home? I do still have the occasional client who wants to send a check and I have them mail it to my parents' house and my parents will, deposit it for me. So, and there are also services that you can set up that will, like you can have your mail forwarded and they'll like open your mail for you, they'll deposit checks for you, et cetera. So there are definitely ways around some of those things. And I think, I always suggest that people start out just kind of paying attention, just the same way that people often say you should like document your systems in order to be able to delegate to a VA or something like that. In the same sense, pay attention to how you spend your day and think, okay, could I do things the same way if I were somewhere else? Or would I need to, is there something I need to change here? Like when I first, my traditional background in kind of training in editing involved lots of reference materials, big fat books.
Chicago Manual of Style.
Exactly. Chicago and the dictionary and what have you. And, that was definitely one thing like, okay, wait, I am relying on these resources. How can I get these another way? And thankfully, Chicago Manual of Style, for example, has an online subscription. So I can access all of that information without having to carry the book around.
Excellent.
And I think it's like you said, it's not something that you don't have to be traveling all the time if you don't want to be, but there's definitely some flexibility that can come out of this. Even like last year, my husband had minor surgery and was in the hospital and like I could go, there was Wi-Fi at the hospital. I could go and, hang out there for the day while he was there and get work done, and just any kind of situation that might come up where it's better for you to be somewhere besides your home office, wherever you normally work. I think it can be really helpful to have that flexibility.
Now, how do you deal with internet in places other than the stable home office?
Yeah, well, and it's, so my home office is constantly changing. I often work, quote unquote, at home wherever we are, but the internet is not always the same. The main thing I do is that I make sure I have a SIM card that I can get data on, 3G or 4G. And that's always kind of my backup. And especially, I have my own podcast. And so making sure I can get online for interviews and all that kind of stuff. So having the data as a backup is usually a really good option. And then other than that, it's just kind of scoping out what else is available nearby, whether that's a coffee shop or a hotel or, some other option. And then some people, I haven't used one of these myself, but there are also the Wi-Fi dongles, which I think sometimes, or there's also little kind of ones that aren't the USB stick, but just like kind of a little personal
the
modem,
thing.
basically. Yeah. Exactly. So there are things like that are often available. Some of those are available internationally, and that can be a good option too.
Excellent. So it seems like you've really figured out your system then to how to run your business all over the world. Do you still come up with new things that you struggle with, or do you feel like you've really got the system down?
Well, I feel like there's always something. But, actually a lot of it these days is not actually, a lot of it's not tied to my being location independent, but it's always tweaking systems and the tools I use and all of that. Like I have, for example, I have some files that are on my computer, some are on my external hard drive, some are in Google Docs, some are in Dropbox, and like, so then I'm like, okay, there's probably a way I could streamline this, or I have more of a system for what goes where. So, that's, everyone would have that same challenge. That's not necessarily about where I am. And then, the other piece of it too is recognizing that there are some things that just work for me, or that I are my preference, and it doesn't matter if it's not the ideal scenario. Like I really like to take notes in a paper notebook, like when I'm doing interviews, when I'm doing coaching calls, and just, brainstorming, what have you. I like to have paper. So I'm always traveling with a notebook, and I'm sure there are people who would say that's just ridiculous, right? Like get rid of all the paper, as I said before. But that's just something that is really, a strong preference for me. So I stick with it. But then I scan any of the pages that I want to keep and then get rid of the notebook. So that's where, I don't have like a shelf where I'm stacking up all of these
or a
notebooks.
suitcase where you've got notebooks.
Yes, exactly.
So do you have a portable scanner then that you travel with, or?
No, I just use a scanner. I think it's called Cam Scanner. It's an app on my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not like, top quality. Every once in a while, like if I have to scan something, like a contract or something to send to somebody, I might go somewhere that I could get like a proper scan. But it's been quite
good enough.
Yeah, it's been good enough. Yeah.
So what would you say would be your kind of top recommendations to someone who's thinking about maybe becoming more location independent with their business? Where should they start?
I think it's really important to look at what kind of experience you want to have. I think it's really easy to be lured by all these images of, working on the beach or whatever it might be. But, like I hate working at the beach.
Yeah.
For example. Yeah. And so, it's worth looking at, what environment do you like? Do you like the beach? Do you like cities more? Do you want to be in like a remote, mountain cabin? Do you want to learn a new language? Do you want to go somewhere the language? Do you want to move around a lot, or do you want to go live somewhere for 3 or 6 months? I think of course, some of these things you don't know until you start doing it, and then you learn what works for you. Yeah. But I think really identifying your vision for, whatever you want to do is really essential, because you're not going to be happy doing it, living someone else's vision. No. So figuring out why you want to do this and what your ideal day, your ideal week, month, whatever looks like for you, I think is a really important place to start.
I think that's a really, really good suggestion, because I think it's so kind of sexy to see all these people running their business, as you said, from the beach, and they've got, this tropical fruit, and they've got this beautiful ocean in front of them, and you think, wow, that's so amazing. It's so attractive. But then, as you've said, you don't like working for the beach. I can't imagine working for the beach. It's windy, it's sandy, it's sticky. It's like, how do you focus? I don't know.
Yeah.
So like oftentimes the reality of a particular location does not match up with that single photograph that you've seen online,
Right. Not to mention, I find a lot of beach locations have horrible internet.
Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, you're not supposed to be online. You're supposed to be lying on the beach.
Exactly. So would you say then that kind of more urban environments are a bit more suitable if you need constant internet to be working?
Well, it depends. There are definitely people who make it work. And maybe, having access to like data and MiFi and stuff, as we mentioned, might be part of it. There are some co-working spaces too that can be an option. Like I know like in Bali, for example, my experience there, the internet was horrible, even though we weren't by the beach. But there are options, or if you stay in more expensive accommodations, like if you're staying at like, a local guest house bungalow kind of thing on the beach, it's probably going to suck. But obviously, if you need better internet, that's going to have to be a priority. Yeah. But another thing too is, I think looking at bigger cities that happen to be on the coast, you know, like in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, for example, is a popular destination. And I haven't been there, but I assume, you know, the internet's better than being in some tiny little town.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Good. So, question. Do you have any women business entrepreneurs who inspire you, or any women business mentors that you'd like to call out to?
That's a good question.
Anyone who inspires you in their location independence, perhaps?
One person who comes to mind is Leonie Dawson, because she's so unapologetically herself. And also, I like that she's built her business not around, you know, like $20,000 platinum coaching packages, but around reaching a large number of women with really accessible products and programs. And that's something that really resonates with me. And I would like to take a similar approach. So yeah, Leonie is definitely someone who I keep my eye on.
Yeah, love her. And I love how she's grown so much over the years. I mean, obviously she's been at it for quite a while, but it's really amazing to see how much she's grown.
Yep.
So, Amy, tell us how other people can benefit from working with you. I know you've got a book, you've got some online programs, you've got downloadable stuff, one-to-one coaching, you've also got the editing. How can people approach you and do a little bit of work with you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways, as you said. So the editing work is focused on nonfiction editing, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who are, you know, writing ebooks and working on other content related to their business. And so my website for that is nomadeditorial.com. And yeah, through Nomadtopia, I have a Facebook group, which is free. You can just search Nomadtopia on Facebook and connect with other people who are either already location independent or working on it. And I have a couple programs available on my website and a couple other things in the works. And one-on-one coaching is mostly focused on helping people who, you know, have a way to make money that they could in theory be doing from anywhere. And I help them, you know, take the plunge. And a lot of what we talked about, right? Like reevaluating your systems and both. So what needs to change and what you've got going on right now. And then also kind of what are you moving towards? What do you want this to look like? What are the logistics you're hung up on? Let's sort all of it out.
Okay. I really like that, because there've been so many times that I've thought, maybe I'd want to take this on the road. I know deep down I'm really, really happy being settled, but every once in a while I get that bug. And I've thought, oh my God, like how I can't even deal with the logistics. Like, what do I even need to think of? I'm going to forget everything.
Right.
So I think that's really, really good that you've got that service to help people, because I think there are probably so many things that people don't even think about.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of moving parts, you know, and it can feel daunting and overwhelming when you're first starting to look at all of it. But it's totally doable. You just got to sort it all out.
Excellent. So where can people find you online?
nomadeditorial.com, as I mentioned, and then nomadtopia.com. And I have Facebook pages for both of those as well. And then on Twitter, I'm Nomad Amy Scott and Nomad Amy on Instagram. And Nomad Amy on Periscope, although I'm not totally sold on it yet.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've done one and I've been like, I really like the idea, but I just can't be bothered to do it. Okay, excellent. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think you've got some really practical advice and a really inspiring story about how you can add more freedom to your business, whether or not you decide to move around as you run your business. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, Holly.
Great. And thanks for listening. And remember to visit hollywharton.com/139 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Business Mindset Podcast with your host, Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed at hollywharton.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to head over to iTunes and leave a quick review of this podcast. It just takes a minute. Thank you.